So our guest today is Sophy Dale. Sophy is a business mentor for creative entrepreneurs, and she resonates with the type 5 on the Enneagram. So welcome, Sophy, and thanks so much for being here.
That's good.
And maybe we can just kick off with you giving a little bit of an introduction to who you are and how some of that fiveness shows up in your life, in your world.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm a business mentor. So I guess the thing that for me defines the fiveness of being a five, I guess, is that the sense in which the kind of core motivation for me in any situation is that I always want to kind of understand and get to the bottom of how it all works and how I fit into whatever the situation is, or if I'm thinking about a client, how their situation is and how what they want to do fits in with the experience and skills and so on that they've got and that kind of thing. And so I found it helpful when I first started getting into the Enneagram to have that overarching sense of what the core motivation is for me in a situation. And then what I found helpful after that was kind of understanding the layers, because to me the thing that defines the Enneagram is different from the other personality typing systems that I'm aware of, is that it does feel a lot more multi-layered, and there seems to be a lot more kind of nuance to it. So it's not just your type, but your wing and what level of integration you're at in the various different areas and that kind of thing, which as somebody who likes kind of digging into more knowledge in an area is appealing for me. So yeah, I think that understanding what my underlying motivation is, but also, getting a better sense of what is it that I, as a five, would be wary of in a particular situation. What are my big fears? What might be limiting me as a result of that? How might other people perceive things that to me just are a natural form of defense? Like I think as a five, I'm probably more likely to kind of retreat inwards if I'm feeling a bit under threat in some way. And to me, that's just like, well, surely everybody does that. And so it's just helpful, although obviously from seeing other people that not everybody reacts in the same way to everything. Having that overview and that kind of slightly externalized perspective on your actions and how that might be perceived by other people, I think is really helpful.
It's amazing how, exactly as you say, it's so obvious when we learn it, that not everybody sees the world in the same way that we do, but it can be quite a breakthrough moment when we have that realization, for sure. I just want to go back for a few minutes to what you were talking about around your motivation. So you were talking very much about needing the knowledge, needing the information, wanting to go deeper. Can you speak to that a little bit more? How do you find that actually serves you or works for you in your life or your business?
Well, I think in both, it means that I do feel that when I make a decision, for instance, I feel that I have really done the research and have the knowledge behind that decision. And ultimately, I would often go away and do a lot of research before coming to a decision. And then the actual decision will probably be quite gut-based, but I can feel free to make that gut-based decision because I've gone away and sort of checked out the facts. So I won't necessarily do the thing that the facts would seem to be pointing towards, but it's important to me to understand where the facts are pointing towards, and so that if I'm doing something that's contrary to that, I'm doing that with full knowledge, and I find that really grounding to feel that I've properly looked into the situation before I do whatever I'm going to do. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I'm curious as to what would happen if you didn't have the resources or time, or you weren't able to go into something in that much detail, or you weren't able to research it to the extent that you would like to. What would happen for you?
Ultimately, I'd have to make the decision anyway, but I would feel much less grounded in the decision, even though, as I say, ultimately, I will make the decision based on my gut feeling, but I feel much more confident doing that because I've done the research. So I guess I would feel uneasy in the decision, even though it might be the same decision that I would have made had I done the research. But that I wouldn't feel that kind of, I just keep coming back to the word grounded. I find it really grounding to feel that I have explored the different avenues and thought them through insofar as you can in advance, and that I understand as much as I can about what it is I'm getting myself into.
I can get a sense of that groundedness. It almost gives me a sense of stability, and I want to use the word certainty. I know nothing's certain, but there's an energy around certainty that I get from what you're saying.
Yeah. So recently we decided to move from the country back into the city again, and move my daughter to school, and my husband changed job at the same time and so on. So it's quite had a decision with a lot of different ramifications to it. And I think to a certain extent I had made the gut decision to move internally, but for me, which obviously had to be an agreed decision within the family, so it wasn't just me making it, before I started all the research of, well, where exactly will we live if we move into the city, and what would we be likely to sell our flat for, and what would we be likely to be able to afford, and which schools could my daughter go to, and all of that kind of thing. So to a certain extent I'd internally, for various reasons that were kind of more emotional than anything else, decided that we needed to move. But going away and doing all of that research made me feel much more certain about the choice before we made it, and made me feel much more, I guess it's partly about feeling in control, that I felt it was a decision that I had control over, and that I had some control over the outcomes. I mean, obviously there's hundreds of variables and not everything will work out the way you think it will, but that I had understood things enough to be able to make the best decision that I could make for us, and in concert with involved in the decision.
That makes sense, and you can feel the sense of reassurance, I suppose, and confidence for sure. Tell me something, when that kind of decision making or planning or whatever the scenario is involves other people, how do they respond to the 5 need to go deeper, to find out more, to gather more information?
Well, I think my husband's resigned to it these days. He knows that I'm going to go off on some massive research dive and keep flinging information at him. He's not a 5. I don't know what he is, but he's not a 5. He doesn't personally need that, ton of information, but he does, luckily, and it's probably how we're still married, he does appreciate the fact that I will go and find that stuff out, particularly things like, schools I don't go to or whatever. He would never sit there and sift through, thousands of website reviews and all the kind of background that I went through looking at all the different school options. He just wouldn't have the patience to do that, but he does want the end result of, picking a school that we're going to be really happy with. I think he accepts that there's going to be this kind of middle phase in any decision that's of any importance, where I will go off and need to just kind of suck in more and more information, and then kind of internally process it, and then want to talk it through at that point. So he just, I think time has shown that if we try and do it any other way, it's not going to work. I think that probably I am well suited to working on my own, having my own business that is just mine, because I think it would probably drive somebody else nuts, the fact that I would, if the business is going to change direction, I will go off and do a lot of research and thinking before making the next move, and that would probably be quite irritating for business. And I think with friends, I guess partly one of the reasons I got into coaching was that I found that I was kind of working through those processes quite a lot with friends, of helping them think through the different layers and levels of a decision, especially fairly large decision about whether to change career or something like that. And I found that I really enjoyed that process of supporting somebody else through that decision-making process. And I guess that was one of the things that attracted me towards the kind of work that I do now.
Mm. And in interacting with various clients, so you're saying, you know, with your husband, for example, he's got to know you over many years. So he expects that level of scrutiny and in-depth research and information seeking. How do you find it impacts your relationships with the various people that come across your path as clients?
I think probably there are people who, you know, might want some element of the service that I provide, but I think it's probably obvious, even just from skimming the website, that, you know, some of what my working style is like, and certainly by the time somebody's done a consultation call with me, I think they have an idea about the fact that I'm not interested in kind of skimming along the surface of making minor changes. I want to really get to grips with who they are and why they set the business up in the first place and what they really want out of it. And what I'm interested in is, can they create a business that really completely suits their greatest strengths, that's really properly in line with their values, that has some connection, however non-obvious it might be to somebody outside of them, to whatever their deeper sense of purpose is in the world, and that also works with their own kind of creative rhythms and helps them to live out the day that they want to live out, day in, day out, and that kind of thing. And if somebody's not interested in working in that way and they just want someone to help them set up a marketing campaign for something they're planning to launch or whatever, then I'm just not the right person for them to work with, and that's fine. And as I say, I think that's probably obvious. Like, I wouldn't often do a consultation call with somebody who was mismatched in that way. And if I was, it would become really evident early on in the consultation, and both of us would probably be like, this is not, you know, we are not the right match. So
it's interesting actually, because you can feel how good a fit your line of work is with your fiveness. So you mentioned the working on your own as an example, but also exactly as you say, in working with your clients, you are going deep. And for me, I've had the benefit of working with you both in one-on-one consultations and as part of your mastermind. And for me, I could feel that sense of fiveness come through in a very helpful way because of exactly what you've described. You go through things to an extra layer. You think about things maybe more deeply than I would or another client would. And that's exactly, as you say, part of the benefit. It's kind of that layering that you need somebody else to be asking the questions of what further information do we need right here? You know, what's going to help us get to the real heart of the situation. So I can see the fiveness in its kind of blossoming in that kind of way. I'd like to maybe chat a little bit about where the fiveness doesn't necessarily serve you and in what ways maybe you notice it holding you back a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the ways in which I understand that fives generally react to problems or where they're not feeling certain or not feeling on strong ground is a kind of withdrawing into yourself and kind of self-protective, kind of going back into a shell kind of reaction. And I found it very interesting when I read the report on my own fiveness, getting that sense of how other people would feel frustrated by the way that if I'm feeling under stress, I will kind of hoard my privacy and my energy levels and my time because I feel like if I don't do that, I won't be able to function. And I never, until I read the report, I never really thought about what that would look like on the outside to other people around me. That was really fascinating to get that sense of, because to me, I'm just trying to function under stress, you know, I don't think of that as being something that would be perceived by other people as kind of stinginess of I won't give them my attention or I won't give them my time, and yet I do see how it would look that way from the outside. So I think those are two of the ways that I really recognize the description of what a 5 does when they're not feeling expansive and in control and confident. Both of those things are things that I totally recognize in myself.
So when you say that you can see how it might come across to other people in a way that is for you very much just, wow, I've got to get through the day, and I'm drawing on whatever resources I have. And exactly as you said, particularly in times of stress, how might that impact the relationships?
So I think partly just not, I mean, in the past, it wouldn't have occurred to me to actively explain that to people, that's why I'm withdrawing or unable to spend as much time with them as they might be expecting me to, or whatever. So simply having the sense that, oh yeah, I need to explain that. I need to, not just withdraw, but explain that I'm just exhausted or overwhelmed or whatever it is. I think without those explanations, I think that certainly, say for instance, when my daughter was a baby and I was getting almost no sleep, and I had an illness that hadn't been diagnosed yet, and was really finding it difficult to cope with just the day in, day out, getting to the end of each day. And I think that I did just expect people to grasp, people in my social circle, wider circle, to grasp that I hadn't suddenly gone off them. I just had no capacity to be in touch with them. And I don't think everybody did grasp that. I think people were, I guess, hurt, felt kind of abandoned. And to me, it was so obvious that I wouldn't choose to cut people off, that it would only be because I simply didn't have capacity. And I didn't even have capacity to reach out and tell people I didn't have capacity. I didn't have any capacity to do anything except get to the end of each day. I wonder if this is a particularly 5 thing, or I wonder, it's possible that this is the case for everybody to a certain extent, but that when you're in any form of overwhelm, your ability to not just be quite self-centered, of I'm overwhelmed and I'm just trying to get through this situation, is diminished, because you find it very hard to have enough kind of almost emotional energy to think about what this is all like for other people around you. Certainly for me, I find that I very much withdraw into myself, and I'm just trying to get through the day. And I think it's another 5 aspect to feel that you have to be self-sufficient and find it hard to ask for help. And so another aspect of that is not only are you not asking for help, but you're not even telling people without asking them for help that you are in a difficult situation. And sometimes that's not about wanting to, I don't think it's actually really ever about wanting to hide the fact you're in a difficult situation. It's just that it doesn't occur to me. It's not a natural thing to me, if I'm in a difficult situation, to think it would be helpful to tell everybody. That doesn't strike me. So I think that is about feeling real strong self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. And I think that's very significant what you've said, that it seems like a small thing to then explain what's going on with the 5-ness when it withdraws and requires time to replenish and gather, and just, as you say, put one foot in front of the other. It seems like a small thing, but it's actually hugely significant, because it's firstly being clear on what your need is, and being clear on what on earth's going on with this horrible feeling that's going on internally. But then it's also reaching out, and yes, realizing the impact and therefore explaining, but also asking for support or assistance. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose a lot of the types feel maybe slightly misunderstood in one way or other. We've all got our thing that we wish people understood about us as our type. What would you wish other people really grasped about the type 5? If you had to choose one thing that is really significant to you, what would you say?
I think it probably is related to that need to go internally to process things and to get my own sense of things before I necessarily immediately respond. And I think that, like, my husband is hugely extroverted and he processes his thoughts by talking them through. And to me, a lot of the time he's just talking complete bullshit whilst he's working his way through and eventually he'll get to the real meat of what it is he thinks or whatever. But in the meantime, there's just, like, totally off the top of his head. To me, that's just the idea that that you wouldn't go away and process that stuff internally first. It's really odd. Like, I just don't really grasp it. So I think that to have other people understand that if I go quiet, it's not because I don't care about what they're saying or whatever. It's because I'm processing and thinking about the best way to help. That would be a good thing for people to understand.
I think that's important, because that quietness or that internal reflection, from my experience of 5s, can come across as if the person's detached or withdrawn, or they're not actually present or engaged. And that's so not true. It's
actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Generally, that you're super engaged, and therefore because it's an internal processing.
Exactly.
You look detached because you are so engaged with what they've just said.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much going on in there that, for me, I've had to learn that we really have to give 5s the space and the time to digest in their own way, in their own time, because that actually brings out the best in them. That allows them to come when they're ready with part of their gifts, which is that depth, which is that insight, which is that knowledge.
And I think certainly in before I was self-employed, when I was in jobs, you know how brainstorming is a big thing in certain kinds of job, and I was always terrible at that kind of brainstorming, because if you just throw a big question at me, I want to go away and think about it and mull it over, and then I will come up with something which I think is, helpful and meaningful. But I will not just, like, fling ideas back at somebody until I've had a chance to think about them, at least for a moment, before saying them. And so that whole kind of way of working and team working and so on for 5s is, I think, challenging.
Very challenging.
Unhelpful. It's not getting the best out of the 5s, and that would be one of my least favorite ways to spend a day, would be corporate brainstorming.
And when you interacting with your clients or in your mastermind group, for example, how does that need to want to give it some thought and reflect? How does that impact your ability to give your clients what they need in those sessions?
I think it does mean that sometimes I don't necessarily give them what they need right in the moment in the session. But generally with my clients, they've usually done some pre-work before we have the session together. And that is partly to benefit them, so that, when they come to the session, they're kind of primed and they're thinking about the issues that we're going to be talking about, and so that we can get through more in the session, because we've already laid some of the foundations. But partly it's to benefit me, that it gives me a chance. I see that pre-work and I can kind of mull it over, and I have a sense of what the uppermost issues are in their mind. And so obviously they may then kind of surprise me by going off in a different tangent when we're actually in the session. But I have a pretty decent sense of what it is that they're thinking about and where they're coming from before we have the actual live coaching session. And so that's, yeah, as I say, that's set up that way is at least as much for my benefit as it is for theirs, because I will have already done that internal processing and have something to build on in the moment. And what happens sometimes is somebody does, just come off on some completely different tangent, and it's something I feel I do need to go away and think about, at which point I say, I'm going to need to go away and think about that. And then I, email them afterwards or arrange a extra 10-minute chat or whatever, because, it wouldn't be my best thing to have somebody fire stuff off at me in the moment I haven't had a chance to think about. Unless, sometimes it just ties in with something we're already thinking about, whatever. It's not like I can never answer a question that I haven't pre-planned, but it's not my strong point, definitely.
And it sounds like you've come up with, without even realizing it, come up with a system that works for you. So exactly as you say, for example, using the pre-questions so that you can get a sense of who that person is before you even hop on the call. And things like saying, well, that particular thing, I'd rather give it a bit more thought, spend a bit more time before I come back to you with my thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you had to share what do you feel is the one main thing that you need to, I want to use the word work on as a 5, because as we know with the Enneagram, it's not necessarily just about, oh, well, this is this lovely insight about myself and all right, so now I know myself a bit better, but it's actually about growing beyond that and developing ourselves as we show up in the various ways in our lives. So what would you say is the 5 part of you that you think is important to grow and work on?
I think the thing I've been thinking about recently, it's another thing that was in the report, was about that 5 tendency to kind of compartmentalize, and that it's a very usual thing for 5s to have people in their lives from different aspects of their lives who they feel really quite close to, but those people don't know each other at all. That would be quite a 5 thing. And that is quite a me thing. I do have people who I feel very close to in different areas who may not even have heard me mention the other person's name, let alone met one another. And I think that sense of not having to so strongly compartmentalize and to be more have more of my own personal life come into how people know me in my business as well, I think, which for me there's quite strong boundaries there for me between the business and my personal life. So although I actually feel very close to those clients that I've worked with for quite a long time, but they wouldn't necessarily know that much about my personal life. And it's not, I don't put much about my personal life in my newsletter or on my website or whatever. Whereas if some coaches are very, very frank about what's going on in their lives within how they present themselves as a business. So I think that's that sense of not having to have quite such strong boxes that are not having those limits in quite the same way, I think is something I would like to work on.
So when you say limits?
That, well, I think, for instance, as a business, I think it limits how visible I could imagine being, that I have such strong boundaries between what's personal and what's business and so on, because there's an extent to which if you're going to be fully visible as a one-person business, you have to be more personal than I have been. So that's really what I mean.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Okay, thank you so much. I think we've got a good sense of what the 5 personality is about. I've learned something as well. So thanks for your time, Sophie. I really appreciate it.